upgrade my knowledge of technology. But I am very, very happy to be here. I am Kikanza Nuri-Robins. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I live in Los Angeles and have lived here since, golly, 1968, which is now most of my life. And I am delighted to be a part of this book study. Kimberly mentioned that it is the fourth edition of our book. So I wrote with friends who became colleagues and who have expanded the circle to include many, many people from around the country. I think I'll start by telling you how we got started. We were desegregation consultants. We were working in school districts in Southern California and across the nation during a period of time in our country where the chosen remedy for dealing with inequities in schools were mixing up the races and sending Black and brown children to schools that had been predominantly white, because the thought was that they would be better taught or that they might learn more things if they were in an integrated environment. That has proven not to be the case, but nonetheless, we were there working as advocates for and allies of the children that were being bused, and looking at schools, school districts, working with boards, helping them to understand that you couldn't just add more kids to the classroom. You had to change what went on in the classroom. And we had to do a lot of attitude adjustment, and we had to help them look at how they were teaching so that they could reach the children where you teach. I do a lot of coaching with leaders, and one of the things that I tell them is that if no one is following you, you're not leading. And as an educator, if no one is learning, you're not teaching. I've worked with some teachers recently, last year, who said to me, well, if you give us better kids, we'll be better teachers. I said, nah, it doesn't work like that. So most schools of education prepare teachers, prepare educators to work with children who are just like them. Most schools of education prepare educators to work with children and to provide children with knowledge and skills that are not necessarily going to serve them in their life in the United States in the 21st century. And so what we have tried to do with the cultural proficiency books is help people to understand the relationship of learning to culture, the relationship of understanding who you are as a person, what you bring to the educational setting, and understanding that you don't have cookie cutters in the classroom, understanding that just because a kid looks a particular way, has the color of skin of cocoa or chocolate or caramel or vanilla, doesn't tell you enough about who they are and how you connect to them. And the best way to connect to them is knowing yourself so that you can share who you are and bring them into your environment and teach them what they need to know while you're learning what you need to know about them and the way they learn. A lot of folks say to me, well, Kikanza, I've got 30 kids in the classroom. I can't do that. I've got 30 kids in the classroom 5, 6 times a day. I can't learn about every single one. Well, you know, we are human beings and we are wired to learn about others, and we are wired to respond differently to different people. But we go to school and we unlearn those things. If you have more than one child in your home, if you have more than one animal that you engage with, if you have more than one kind of plant, even though they belong to the same category, plant, dog, cat, kid, you don't treat them exactly the same way. you make adaptations and adjustments to how they are in the world and who you are in the world in order to engage with them, to connect with them, to build a relationship with them so that you can nurture them and help them to grow. It's the same thing in the classroom. You know this intuitively. You know this in here at the very place within you where the truth of who you are resides. And so part of becoming culturally proficient, part of being on the cultural proficiency journey is finding that place of authenticity, finding that place of caring, finding that value for relationships, finding the willingness to take the risks of being vulnerable and learning, even though you're grown up and have lots of education and lots of degrees, giving yourself the chance to get to know who you are in a different kind of environment. So we were desegregation consultants, and I was very young and very angry and thought that the best way to do work around desegregation and race relations and human relations was to stand on the table yelling and screaming and telling white people what racist they were. And so my friend and mentor, Ray Terrell, said to me, well, you know, Kikanza, we want them to invite us back, and they're not going to invite us back if you keep doing this. And I realized it wasn't working for me. It wasn't working for our audiences either. So I said, you know, let me step back for a little while and not do this work because it was taking so much out of me emotionally. So I was teaching cost-benefit analysis in Sacramento in a small school of public administration. Someone made an inappropriate comment in the classroom, and somebody else said, well, that wasn't very culturally competent. My ears perked up. I said, cultural competence? What is that? She worked for the Department of Mental Health Services. And at lunchtime, we walked over to her office and she gave me a monograph called Toward a Culturally Competent System of Care. And it was written by a man called Terry Cross. Terry Cross is a member of the Seneca Nation, First Nation people. He lives now, Seneca Nation is in New York. He lives now in Oregon. And so I took that little book to my hotel room and read it. And I called up Ray Terrell and I called up Randy Lindsay and I said, I think I found it. I think I found the thing that's going to help us. Well, Terry is a social worker and he developed the framework for cultural competence for looking at mental health services to children who were not part of the dominant mainstream white society. And he said basically that the clinicians were treating these kids, these Native American, these Inuit, these Eskimo children like they were sick white people, instead of recognizing the cultural differences, recognizing the cultural norms that they come with, and helping them to become more effective, productive in their particular environments. So the thing that I love about the cultural proficiency framework is that it is so adaptable. I work in schools, I work in faith-based organizations, I work in hospitals, I work in schools of nursing, schools of pharmacy. I work for some of the largest not-for-profit organizations in the country. And cultural proficiency is adaptable in all these different environments. So it is not an educational model. It is a model for engaging with people in healthy ways. And there are, as you have read in the book, 4 tools or 4 components of the cultural proficiency framework. There are the guiding principles, the continuum, the barriers, and the essential elements. And so the principles are the values, they're the foundation for doing this work. They are the things that help us understand the why of this particular work. And the principles that are most important to me, that speak to me most strongly, are 1, culture is a predominant force. Speaks to me because I'm an anthropologist. And the lens through which I see the world is a lens of culture. So you can't not have culture. You can't not be culturally biased. If you think that something is unbiased or culture free or culturally unbiased, that just means it's your culture and you can't see it. It's like water. You don't notice it until it changes or it's gone. Like air, you don't notice it until you can't breathe it anymore. So culture is a predominant force, and culture influences how groups define and solve problems. What does that mean? Think about hair and the idea of hair getting wet, or hair being straight, or hair being curly. Depending upon who you are ethnically, that's going to determine what you see as problematic and what you see as natural in terms of how your hair works, and the programs and the policies and the issues around hair. In California schools in the 60s, many schools had swimming pools, and swimming was a required class. Well, the little Black girls who were in school at the time, everybody had straight hair in the 60s, and going into a swimming pool meant that your straight hair was not going to be straight anymore. And naturals were not in style at the time. So it was a big issue for Black families, And so saying, oh, well, they can put on a swimming cap. Well, swimming caps help keep the hair out of the pool, but they don't help keep the water out of the hair. And so it was still an issue. And so cultural proficiency and a culturally proficient approach to doing the work is the work that helps you see what's going on from the lens of those who are in the room. So you've got these guiding principles. And then you've got the barriers which have to be overcome. The barriers are the sense of privilege and entitlement, the unawareness that there's even a problem, and the resistance to change. It is also the systems of oppression and privilege that you didn't help to build, that people built without your consent, but which advantage some people and disadvantage other people and other groups. And then there is the misuse and abuse of power that comes from those who are part of the dominant groups. So the guiding principles are the foundation, the values that inform the work. The barriers are those obstacles that have to be overcome in order for the work to be done. The cultural proficiency continuum is a tool that gives language for describing situations and events. So in the 70s, when I was yelling and screaming at white people, if I had said, rather than saying, you are all racist and you need to change, if I had said, well, you know, your activities, your policies, this process for educating these kids is probably a reflection of cultural intolerance or cultural destruction. At least we would have kept the door open and the conversation going, because you might have said, huh, what is that? And then I would have had a chance to have a conversation with you, because what I have learned is that we make a difference one conversation at a time. I used to think that I could change the whole world, and now I know I can only change the part of the world that I'm in this moment. And I do that as I'm talking to you. I do that one conversation at a time. So the cultural proficiency continuum gives you language for describing situations, for events, for actions, for activities, for stuff that happens. And it gives you language for taking it apart. And there are many, many ways that you can use the cultural proficiency continuum. So I'm going to ask that the framework be put up on the screen at this point. And I'm going to talk to you about the points along the continuum. And so Kimberly, if you can enable me to share my screen, I would be most grateful.
Okay, you're enabled.
Thank you. And here we go. So this is the framework. We have the guiding principles at the top, and we have the essential elements, which you'll be talking about later. The barriers to cultural proficiency need to be overcome. And here we're focusing on the cultural proficiency continuum. So at one end of the continuum, we have destruction. At the other end of the continuum, we have proficiency. When we started doing this work, we called it cultural competence. That's what Terry Cross calls it. And you'll hear lots of others, particularly social workers and psychologists, talking about cultural competence. Sometimes people use the term as a generic term for this work, the diversity, equity, inclusion work. It's important for everyone to understand that it's not a generic term, it's a thing, it's something specific. And so we would say, oh, we want to talk to you about cultural competence, and folks would push back and say, well, we're already culturally competent. So we said, well, are you culturally proficient? And they said, well, what's that? And we said, gotcha. And we sat down and were able to have a conversation. So these are the two ends of the continuum. Halfway point here between cultural reduction and cultural pre-competence. The left side of the continuum is reactive. The left side of the continuum is pushing away from behaviors that are healthy and engaging and that will help to build a healthy organizational culture and healthy individuals in that culture. The points on the right side of the continuum are transformative and help you move along this cultural proficiency journey, which is an ongoing thing. It's not something, you don't take a class, you don't do a workshop, you don't have some one transformative experience and say, and I am now culturally proficient, put my tattoo on my head. It doesn't work that way. You are only as good as your last conversation, which means that you can be really, really good working with children. You can be really, really good working with the Latinx community and the communities, all the communities that are under that umbrella. You can be really, really good working with West African children, and you can be really, really bad when somebody starts talking about pronouns and you say, what is that? And what difference does that make? And when it comes down to the gender thing or the sexual orientation thing, you just kind of shut down and say, well, my God said that, I don't need to deal with that because it's just wrong. Which means that you are well developed here and not so well developed over here, and you got some growing to do. So you will notice if you compare this continuum to the continuum in your book, you'll see a couple of differences. So looking down at the bottom of this sheet, you see that this framework is from the book Fish Out of Water, which was written by me and our friend Louis Bundy. And so one of the things that we believe, that Terry Cross believes, that is reflected in the difference in the Manual for School Leaders first edition and the Manual School Leaders fourth edition, is that you're going to see changes. You're going to see reflections of our growth. You're going to see reflections of experiences that we have that have made a difference to how we use this framework. And so the point, cultural reduction, is in your book called Cultural Blindness. Now, why would we shift and use different language? Why do you think? I know you have your microphones muted. You can unmute them because I'm asking you a question. If you want to just shake your head and say, no, don't make us talk right now. Don't make us talk yet. I can accept that, but do know that you will be talking at some point. So cultural blindness means that I don't see something. I'm missing something. And the part of being culturally competent, being culturally proficient, is engaging with all kinds of differences, not just what we call race and culture, but all kinds of human differences, one of which is differences in ability, one of which is the difference to be able to see. Now, we've got it on the left side of the continuum, right side good, left side bad. So it's a behavior that we're not pushing. It's a behavior that we don't want you to have. And so to call it cultural blindness feeds into the idea that there's something wrong with being blind. Ask a blind person, there ain't nothing wrong with me. I can't see what you see, but it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with it. It's different. It's a different way of being in the world. There are some things that blind people can do that sighted people can't do. So we looked at what does cultural blindness mean and came up with this term, cultural reduction. And that what people do that are culturally reductive is they narrow the world down and they say things like, well, I don't see differences. I treat everyone just the same way. They reduce the differences to their common denominator. I treat everyone just like me. That's like the misuse of the golden rule, in that I treat everyone just like me, just the way I want to be treated. Well, sweetie, everybody's not like you, and everybody doesn't want to be treated like you. You need to find out how they need to be treated, how they want to be treated, and treat them that way. Some people call that the platinum rule. I just call it the right interpretation of the golden rule. So if you're culturally reductive, it means you see all the difference and you value the differences and the difference that difference makes, and take that into consideration in the classroom and in your environment. So, for example, I was not able to walk for a number of years. I walked with a lot of pain. And I was on a cane for a while, and then I was on a walker, and then I was in a wheelchair. And so I was still trying to work, and I would drive up to a building and there might be 2 handicap parking spaces, and that's it. And my choice was either, if they were full, I'd have to either park way, way, way far away. And sometimes when it got really bad, I just couldn't go in. I'd call them up and say, I can't get in. There's no place for me to park. Or I would get to the door and there'd be stairs. And I said, how am I going to get up the stairs? They said, oh, well, there is an accessible door. We have an accessible door. Well, where is it? Well, you walk down this walkway and around the building and into the back, and that's where the accessible door is. I said, do you get it? Every step hurts. Think Little Mermaid. Every single step hurts. Putting the door way over there is not helping me. This is not accessible. And so it goes back to the principles, and that your perspective, the group that you belong to, your differences define what problems are and how problems are solved. And so people who are in the dominant culture, able-bodied, able to walk, able to leap tall buildings, able to run up the stairs, well, it's just 2 stairs. What difference does it make? It makes a lot of difference if you can't pick up your legs, if 3 inches feels like a mountain. And so cultural reductionists try to reduce things down and level it out. We're going to treat everyone exactly the same way, meaning that some people are going to be advantaged by the system and some people are going to be even more disadvantaged by the system. And so that's why we changed the point to cultural reduction, because we don't want to make the differences wrong. We don't want to reinforce the bias that it's better to be sighted than unsighted. We don't want to reinforce any of the biases toward these differences that are built right into our culture, that are built into our society. So cultural intolerance, the second point, is also, we use different language for that one. And the reason that we came up with intolerance as opposed to incapacity is that one, grammatically, it's easier to work with. And two, it's easier for people to understand. People get it about intolerance. So as you go across the continuum, destruction, what does that mean? We don't like you, we don't want you here, and we're doing our best to either to get rid of you or at least to get you out of here. That's destruction. Intolerance, we don't like you, we think you're wrong, we know we have to keep you here, so we're going to make it as hard as possible and stay within the law. Cultural reduction, we see you, we see that you're different from normal people, but we're going to treat you like normal people, and maybe you can rise up. Cultural pre-competence, we're doing this really wonderful thing. Pre-competence is having the accessible door around the building. Pre-competence is a recent example of pre-competence. The school understood about transgender kids, and the school people understood that some of these kids need to have bathrooms that don't say girl, don't say boy, just a bathroom. And so it was Pride Week, and one of the kids, one of the boys, one of the identified male children had a crown of flowers on his head. And so the teacher, understanding that we have these other kids in the school and we need to be kind to them, looked at this kid, this boy with the flowers on his head and said, "Are you one of those trans kids?" And he said, "No, I'm a kid." "Well, then you can't wear those flowers. You got to take those flowers off." So not quite there. Being pre-competent means that you make mistakes for the right reasons, you have good intent, or it means that you don't have enough knowledge, or it means that you have knowledge and you're using it incorrectly, inappropriately, inadequately. It is, pre-competence, a story on myself. So I'm learning about the pronoun thing. And there is, so I was moderating a committee, and a young person was joining us for the first time. And I wanted to make it safe for this young person to share her pronouns. And it just didn't come out of my, it was messed up. And so she was very gracious. We got through it. I mean, it wasn't horrible, but it wasn't as cool as I usually am. And so afterwards I said, "Oh, would you please help me out? Help me. What did I know I did it wrong. Give me some language so I can do it better next time. And what should I have done?" And she said, "We get misgendered all the time. And so what you did was fine. If you had made a bigger deal out of it, then you would have objectified me. We're good. There are bigger things that are important to me than my pronouns. And I appreciate the fact that you tried." And so she gave me some language for how to do it next time. And I keep practicing and I'm getting better at it. And so that's another example of pre-competence. It means that I'm on the journey and I'm learning. Now, if you ask me about other things, if you ask me about access, if you ask me about Black kids, if you ask me about First Nation children, I can talk to you about that for a long time, but there are other things that I'm learning. And so it's constant growing, constant learning. We worked with a school and they were gung-ho, we're doing this cultural proficiency stuff. And we started putting the calendar together, and the administrator in charge said, "Okay, we're gonna do our celebration on this date." And we said, "Well, do you realize that that date is Ramadan?" "Ramadan, what's that?" "Well, the Muslim community will be fasting. So it wouldn't be cool to have a party with lots of food when folks are not even drinking water." And she said, mean we have to pay attention to everybody? Like, yeah, you do. So that's pre-competence. Cultural competence is when you're in a groove, at least in this particular environment, and you are making decisions and making plans and designing programs using the essential elements of cultural proficiency. And so a lot of folks, once they get introduced to this framework, they want to teach cultural proficiency. That's not what we want you to do. We want you to teach in a culturally proficient way, because we have seen classes where it's very didactic and very one way and very oppressive as they're trying to teach about not being that stuff. So you have to be it. It's a way of being it. And so better to be culturally proficient in all that you do. So people will say, so how did you know to ask that question? Or why are you doing it that particular way? And then you can talk to them. Cultural proficiency is a journey. It's the far end of the continuum when you begin to co-create with those who are in the room the environment that's going to work for you. You've got to ask the people what they need, what they want in order to make it work for them. So those are the 6 points on the continuum. So one of the most common questions we get is, so where am I? Where would you put our organization? Where is my classroom? We're at least pre-competent, are we? You're only as good as your last conversation. So let's look at your lesson plan. Let's look at your bulletin boards. Let's look at the way the kids line up before they come into the classroom. Let's look at the forms of address. Let's look at how you address bullying. Let's look at your bullying of those kids that are kind of different and are getting on your nerves. That's how we can tell where you are on the continuum. Now, you can get really detailed and take a really deep dive and say, all right, if we're looking at the elements, if we're assessing culture, what does assess culture look like along the continuum? Assessing culture at cultural destruction is, there's somebody who's not like us, get rid of them. Assessing culture at cultural intolerance is, there's a couple of those different folks, so we want to make sure that we don't do anything that's going to get us in trouble with the feds. Cultural reduction, assessing culture, so I see that there are a few folks who aren't normal, and so we want to make sure that everybody gets exactly the same thing, because we don't want anyone to tell us that we're not being fair. Assessing culture at cultural pre-competence is saying, well, maybe we need to do some diversified instruction here. Maybe we need to ask the kids what kind of games they want to play that would help them. We'll give them the guidelines. We want strength and endurance and flexibility and get your heart rate up. And so you tell us the kind of games that you'd like to play that will do those things. Assessing culture at the cultural pre-competence is, I see that we're going to have some folks here who are from immigrant families. We need to make sure that we understand what welcome looks like for them. I was in a school district that had an influx of Latinx families. They were mostly Mexican and Guatemalan, and they weren't coming to the parent-teacher association meetings. And the Caucasian educators and parents said, well, we sent them an invitation. Oh, so what did the invitation look like? Well, we sent it in. So we looked at it, it's in English. Well, did you consider that people may not be able to read the English? And so, okay, so we'll get a translator. We'll do the Google Translate. Nah, you probably don't want to do that unless you've got somebody to read the Google Translate, because Google doesn't speak Spanish natively. And then they decided, we're going to send a note home with the kids. Well, you have to understand that some kids think that a note to the parent means they're in trouble, so the notes don't get home. And then somebody said, well, I called them and they still didn't come. And so over time, so it took them 2 years to do this learning, but they finally realized that they needed to send something in writing, they needed to follow up with a call, and they needed to ask 3 times. Because culturally, asking the first time is what you're supposed to do. Asking the second time means that, oh, you really do see who I am. Asking the third time means that I really want you to be there. And so when they figured out that they needed to ask 3 times, after they had gotten past that, well, we didn't have to ask the other parents 3 times, they just came. You know, what does welcome mean? What does inclusion mean? Define this problem not from your perspective, but from the perspective of the person that you're welcoming. See? So it's one thing to say you're welcome at the table. It's another thing to set the table so there's room for them, and to provide food that they want and that they can eat, and a table that lets them reach what everybody else is reaching. If you put them at the kids' table, the special table with the chipped china and the mismatched flatware, that's not welcome. And so looking at what inclusion means from the perspective of the many groups that you're dealing with, looking at what welcome means, looking at how you need to adapt and shift so that everybody feels that they have voice, that bottom line, everybody who you encounter says, she sees me and she cares. That's the message you want to deliver. I see you and I care. And I care enough to connect with you in a relationship so that you will feel comfortable telling me what I need to know about you so that I can serve you. And I share enough about myself so that you find something that you can connect to. So I'm working with, I'm coaching a manager right now who speaks Spanish natively. And she's doing all of her work, most of her work she's doing in English. And so in Spanish, there's a formal form of address and a casual form of address. And so what she has been doing is taking the very formal Spanish, translating it to very formal English, formal written English that she's speaking. And so she comes off as being stilted and tight, uptight, and unengaged and uncaring, because she also sits very still, because this is, from her cultural perspective, very respectful. And she doesn't push, she doesn't make clear what is mandated and what is flexible and negotiable. And someone gives her a problem, she says, well, according to our policies, this is what needs to be done. And so I will make sure that that is done and that we stay in compliance with our contract. As opposed to, wow, I can see how that really is a problem for you. I can see how that really caused a problem for you and your kids, or that's really inconvenient. I'm sorry that you've had to deal with that. Let me see what we can do to work that out. There's some things I can't do, but there's some things that I can do. So maybe together we can figure out how to solve this problem. She didn't know she could do that. She didn't know she could shift. That's called code switching. She didn't know that just shifting her style, shifting how she said it, was moving her along that cultural proficiency continuum toward being culturally proficient and giving culturally proficient customer care. So sometimes it's not the what, it's the how it's done. And so that's what we want. That's the message that we want to deliver. So using the continuum allows you to describe, it allows you to assess, it helps you to set goals. If you work on the rubrics, and in some of our other books, there are lots and lots of rubrics, then you can say, all right, you can identify, here you are in a culturally intolerant space, and you can see where you need to grow and how you need to grow. It's a way of working with your colleagues and with your kids to say, all right, this is where we are. How can we get better? What do we need to do to get better as it relates to assessing culture, as it relates to truly valuing the diversity, the difference between accepting and valuing. A baby, you accept the fact that the baby poops. The baby might throw up on your silk shirt as you're trying to get out the house. You value the baby. And so we want to value diversity. We don't want to just accept it. We don't want to just tolerate it. We want to value it. And then understanding that you're going to manage the dynamics of difference, and it gets messy. This is hard work and it's messy work. Adapting means you get to change too. And institutionalizing cultural knowledge is that the knowledge doesn't just stay with you. I've got a number of colleagues across the country who are one-person departments. How is their work going to be institutionalized if they're the only one who's responsible for it? Whenever an agency says to me, oh, we're going to have a diversity person, we're going to have a diversity office, and everything related to diversity and inclusion is going to go to that office. No, at best that's cultural reduction. Maybe it's cultural pre-competence. It's everybody's issue. It's everybody's problem. It's everybody's work. It's how we do this together. So I see it's about 6:20, which means it's time for me to stop talking and for you to answer some questions. And so I'm going to turn this back over to Kimberly, and I will take this down so that we can all see one another.
All right, thank you, thank you. So I just want to share that it just falls fresh on my heart and ears. As many of us work in districts, and before we speak, I always give my disclaimer that we do not say what district we work in. We do not name specific students or specific names of leaders. We speak authentically and as we can in this space to use this as a platform to grow our learning and take it back to our prospective works. Just speaking to value and diversity and understanding where everyone is, I don't want to be the one to talk the whole time. I want to give this platform to our guest to share out. And we're going to show the questions right now. We're going to post those. And if you want to chime in, you can put the hand up and unmute yourself. And we're going to dig in a little bit deeper and sharpen our tools at this point. All right, so, and it's okay if you want to do question number 3 versus 1 or 2, chime on in at this time. Anybody want to speak on any of the questions at this time?
Let me ask you all a question. I'm looking at number 3. I didn't talk about macro and microaggressions, but they are those microaggressions are the slights, the things that are easily said, oh, I was just being funny, or I was just teasing you, or that was an isolated incident. Macroaggressions are blatant, obvious, and wrong. So where would you put those on the continuum? That's a gimme question. Where do macroaggressions fall on the continuum?
And just, hold on a second.
Come on, unmute your mics. Let's talk.
Well, I raised my hand. Can you hear me? I'm
Yes.
new to the
Hi,
forum.
Tamara.
Hi, and I came in midway, and I actually have another Zoom in a few minutes. I'm a 4th grade teacher, 21 years in, and I came in right when you were talking about cultural differences. And like you said, I'm pretty good with certain things, and I understand the pronoun issue. I had a student that I've known her entire life that transitioned from a she to a he. So I had to relearn, because I've known her since she was in 1st grade, with my son, and he is graduating this year. So that is a new
Yeah.
world from, I would avoid it completely and just use the chosen name. But I'm aware of it now. And another is, as you were saying, the Ramadan.
Mm-hmm.
As I am Zooming with my class, I scheduled a 5 p.m. Zoom, because a parent shared out to me that they were practicing Ramadan, and she was worried that his work would come late at night, and that didn't bother me at all.
Mm-hmm.
But she says she lets them sleep all day to preserve their energy, and then they're up at night. And so, and I knew Ramadan was going on because my own son had mentioned it, but I didn't incorporate it into my daily plans. But it took the parent making me aware of it, and now I will always be aware of it. Mm-hmm. So it just makes me wonder how many other things I'm unaware of, and you, like you say, you don't want to offend. So I always try to be approachable. So like you say, you share enough of your own life so that they feel that they can come to you. But it was eye-opening, and like I say, 21 years in, I'm still learning. And so like I said, new, and I'm joining in, and I appreciate being here.
Great. Thank you, Tamara. One of the things that I learned this year is, Jehovah's Witnesses don't celebrate birthdays and they don't celebrate holidays. And so one agency was trying to figure out, how are we inclusive? So instead of celebrating the birthdays of their colleagues, they celebrate their work anniversaries. Everybody has a work anniversary, and everybody gets a cake and a candle on their work anniversary instead of their birthday. And that was a way of being inclusive.
I like the part in the chapter where it says, and I'm responding to number 1 with the continuum of seeing differences and respond positively and affirming. So that's what Tamara did. Like, wow, I had no knowledge of that. But getting that openness and that mindset is beautiful when it's received versus when there's a shield put up. Yeah. So I believe sometimes there's reservation when people get offended when you interrupt or point out something to educate. So using the language that you use, Kikanza, was wonderful. Like, I'm wondering how, like, it's kind of how you start off a question, like, it just makes it feel like, okay, you're trying to help me. I'm not saying in all instances, but that's something that I wanted to point out.
Absolutely. So help me understand. I'm puzzled. I've never had experience with. Could you teach me about?
I love it. So I want to also share another disclaimer. The reason why we do the Zoom, and I don't know what's going on with Facebook, it's never happened, it wouldn't go live. The purpose of the live, and I'm not pushing anyone to talk at this time, but we're silenced at a lot of our jobs. Not silenced on, I wouldn't say on purpose, it's just a comfort level that you're at based off of the skills. So this platform is built for you to build your skill sets and to practice. And also it's like a testimony to others to say, oh my gosh, I can say that. Oh my gosh, just like Kikanza gave us those sentence strands to start off a conversation. I had a peer of mine that thought they overheard something that sounded like maybe racist or a comment about a different race, and did not feel comfortable, approaching that individual, but it made that person uncomfortable. So this platform is to help us learn how to build our own capacity so that when we're in those situations that we can speak up and it will be received. So I really thank you, Kikanza, for those examples.
You are so welcome. I'm putting the names of the books in the chat. Somebody had asked for that. Oops, and I misspelled my own name. There they are.
All right.
Look at
awesome.
that.
I'm gonna give a shout out to our tech person, Unboxed. We have Unboxed on, Karis Cox, and she's just amazing. So I'm glad she put the books up in this format, because at chapter 10, I'm going to invite all of our speakers back, but we're going to look at what book do we want to dive into next. As I said in the beginning, there are so many tools. There's just not one. But Fish Out of Water, I do want to point out Kikanza's work, because I had shared having, like, when you feel like you're by yourself. And I just would like Kikanza to share a little bit more about the Fish Out of Water.
Fish Out of Water is a book for people who don't fit in, or for people who are trying to help people who don't fit in. So there's a couple of perspectives. One, I think each of us, most people have felt like a fish out of water at some point in their life. And so you may be the only one in some environment. And you've got to, how do you learn the culture of an organization? That's what helps you to not be a fish out of water. If you're working with kids, you know, the kids who are just different and they can't figure it out, helping the kids to figure out what are the rules, what are the norms, what are the unwritten rules of this particular environment. You may have had colleagues who, they know how to be good teachers, but they just don't fit in the school because they haven't figured out what the rules are, how to do school in this place, in this way. And so Fish Out of Water looks at the culture of the organization, looks at the unwritten rules of the culture, how to teach it, how to change them, how to adapt yourself, and also when you need to leave. I strongly believe that there is a place for everyone, but every place is not for everybody. And I see too many good people, talented people, highly skilled people who are trying to make themselves fit into this place. I said, you can do it, but you're going to make yourself crazy and they're never going to like you. So why don't you go someplace where you can be successful? When people ask me to work in organizations, there are lots of organizations that are in bad shape. I want to work with the B folks, B minus, just good solid B, and help them to get to the A. I want to work with good people to get them better. I gave up trying to fix the whole world.
Yes.
And so sometimes, especially when you feel like it's just me, you got to put yourself in an environment where you can make a difference. And so Fish Out of Water helps you to do that.
Wow, you took us right into 6:30, Dr. Kikanza Nuri-Robins. Please check out her website. I want to thank you guys for your patience. You know, when I say when something's good, you know what I mean? The enemy tries to come in and stop it, but I got on my cell phone and I went live because I just want to share the work. I was talking to Dolores Lindsay and I telling her how honored I am about having Kikanza on and the work that they do and how it's changed my perspective, my lens. I was the one that would want to be on the table. I'd come home crying like they're not listening to me. And you are so right about the point of we try to fit into spaces that maybe that is not our space anymore. So we have to be open to the opportunities that are out there for us. I talk to people about forming guiding coalitions, or maybe I'm not telling anyone to quit their job by any means, but looking into other directions that fit what your passion is. Do what you desire to do, because you're going to be impactful, you're going to be effective. And so I thank you for those perspectives tonight. Please, if you want to screenshot this screen, if you want to get in touch with Kikanza Nuri-Robins, I hope to have her on again if she's available. Chapter 10, I'm bringing everybody back at the end. And I'm going to put up a poll and share different books as soon as I receive them to look at what is going to be our next book study Thursdays, or let's talk about Culture Thursdays. As long as I have audience that want to learn and dig deeper with me, I'm going to continue this work. If you want me to email you, put your email address in the chat, and I'll work on that. I'm trying to get techie. Karis is helping me out with that. But I'm working on it. I'm going to start a little listserv and get me a website going. But we're going to keep the conversation going, and I thank you for helping me grow. If anyone has a question, you can ask it now. If not, this is the end of our meeting. Any questions? All right, let's talk about Culture Thursdays. Chapter 7 concluded. Thank you, Dr. Kikanza Nuri-Robins. You have changed my life, and I'm sure many more have been touched today. Thank all my guests for getting on, and share with a friend to come on next Thursday. I hope that we will be live again. I'm going to post the video. I learned how to record tonight. See what pressure does to you. Chapter 6, what Tamika, you went over chapter 6, it shows who you really are. And I'm like, I'm going to figure it out. So we are recording tonight because I am passionate about the work and I'm just overjoyed with the support. Hey,
So look at all right, so Tamika and Kathy are pushing Leading Female,
hold it up.
one of the newest cultural proficiency books.
Yes, and sign up. I will post the link on my page. I will be engaged. I want to take the cultural proficiency community over with me. I believe that's going to be on Monday nights, right? You remember the days, Tamika? What days are books? Monday nights. Okay, Kathy, Monday nights.
Yes.
So you can sign up. There's a Google Doc, but I'll repost it again. And we have like 99 people, right? Signed up?
I think so.
Oh my gosh. So it is going to be rich and impactful. So if you have not signed up yet, and I will be sharing books hopefully by next Thursday. Do your homework. Chapter 8, here we come. And I am just so blessed to have you all. Have a wonderful evening. Virtual hugs to everybody. Thank you guys.
Kikanza. Thank you all for your work. Thank you all for your work.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good
And
night.
I'll see you the information. Bye, Kathy. Bye,
Love
everybody.
you.
Thank you, Terry. Love you.
This is awesome.
Hey, Tamika.
Hey, Kathy. This
How
is
are ya?
great.
I know. I love this.
I can't wait for this whole COVID thing to be over so we can all get together.
Yes, and you know, we can go to Kim's house because remember you told me that your mom was going to cook for me one day.
Come on over. She will. I will help her out. It's on.
I'm going to be in Fresno this weekend.
Okay. COVID. We not lifted
I
yet.
know. I'm going to my son's wedding.
Oh.
Wow.
Post
We went
pictures,
from-
Kathy.
We went from 200 people down to 15.
Wow.
You know what? It's going to be awesome.
It's gonna
Go
be awesome.
live.
It really is. You're gonna make it so, it'll be so special. You'll make it so wonderful.
It's going to be.
Yeah.
I even snuck to Monterey today and got my hair cut.
Are you gonna go live, Kathy?
You know, it depends upon if the kids will let us.
All right.
You know, I've learned that I don't get to do just anything I want to do anymore. I have to ask the permission.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
That's
I
what
like
I'm
this.
learning, Kathy. That's what I'm learning about being a first-time grandma that I just became. And I want to post everything.
I know. I get mom. Like,
Can't do that. You didn't ask me.
you really
I
didn't
know.
I'm like, what the hell do I have to ask for? I gave birth to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello.
Thank you guys. I love you all. Thank you so
Absolutely.
much.
Everybody.
And so, you know, Kimberly, remember I said that Facebook looked different when I logged on earlier? They changed it, and that's probably what happened, is that it's more than just the look. They probably changed some of the structure as well.
So maybe some updates. Well, I recorded it, so we're still recording. It's gonna go. This is gonna be posted.
Oh God! Erase the part about the wedding.
But I'm in the call. I'm gonna give you a call right quick.
And the grandbaby, please don't do that.
You're really.
Your kids are gonna hear what you said about them on this recording. Kikanza, I'm gonna call you real quick if you don't mind.
All right.
All right.
That means you all.
Bye one more time.
Bye guys. See you later. Bye bye.